It was a peculiarly bright October when Lord Peter Deathbread Wimsey, monocled and faintly dandified, alighted at Dower Hollow with a suitcase containing 4 cravats, a first edition of Don's Devotions, and a bottle of Lafroise, which, he insisted, had matured better than the family solicitor. He had not meant to come at all, certainly not to rural Berkshire, where the hedgerows still whispered as though in iambic pentameter and the houses looked as if they disapproved of electricity. "I say, Bunter," he murmured, adjusting the angle of his Homburg, "one hardly expects a corpse in a parish where the principal controversy is over the organist's modulation in Jesu, lover of my soul." "Very true, my lord," said Bunter, who bore the air of a man prepared to photograph bloodstains and decant wine in the same afternoon. "Though I understand the deceased was less attuned to music than to malice." The telegram had been brief and baffling. Murder at Dower Hollow. Come at once. Something most frightfully off with the footman. P. Arkwright, Sir Peveril Arkwright, the sort of retired colonel who wore moustache wax in the bath, had been a fellow clubman of Wimsey's, known chiefly for his collection of antique sabres and his inability to grasp irony. That he was now pleading Wimsey's presence suggested something sufficiently grotesque to disturb even his military digestion. Upon arrival, the great house, an unforgiving Tudor pile softened only by ivy and bad plumbing, loomed against the burnished sky. Its gravelled forecourt bore the hallmarks of interrupted decorum. A police motor car stood awkwardly beside a barouche that had not moved since the Boer War. They were met at the door by an ashen-faced butler, whose name, Cresswell, seemed preordained by God and the Morning Post. Cresswell bowed with an economy of motion, suggesting either recent bereavement or disapproval of Lord Peter's tie. "If your lordship will follow me," he said, "Sir Peveril is in the morning room. The inspector is already present." The inspector, one Tom Heaviside, fresh-faced and inelegant, rose from a wing chair where he had been making copious notes on a pad that appeared, even from a distance, to be accusing the furniture of perjury. "Lord Wimsey," he said, slightly flustered, "didn't expect you quite so soon." "I travel swiftly when there's talk of an uncooperative footman," said Wimsey, removing his gloves, finger by finger, like a conjurer. "May I assume the fellow's behavior is more offensive than usual?" "He's dead," said Sir Peveril grimly. "Found in the Rose Gallery this morning, face down in a vase of hothouse peonies, smiling." "Dead and smiling," mused Wimsey. "Well, well, as the poet says, even in our ashes live their wonted fires." Unless, of course, the expression was fixed posthumously, which might suggest either mischief or rigor mortis with a theatrical bent. Sir Peveril looked as if he would rather be fencing the French than discussing poetic cadavers. "The whole thing's damnably queer. He had no business in that part of the house at all. The gallery's kept locked. No servant goes there save on orders. He'd no key." "And yet he found one," Wimsey murmured. "Or was let in." Heaviside, who had been consulting his notes with the careful attention of a man trying to remember how vowels work, said, "We're treating it as suspicious. Cause of death's not yet certain. No sign of a struggle, no visible wounds, and yet something unnatural about the business. The smile, as you say. And then there's the missing salver." "Salver," said Wimsey. His voice perked as if someone had mentioned antique port. "Yes," said the inspector, flipping to a page of his notebook with labored drama. "Silver, chased, used only for special guests. Vanished from the sideboard sometime in the night." "That is odd," said Wimsey cheerfully. "Most people commit murder for money, but it's not usual to serve it on a tray afterward." Sir Peveril glowered. "And the household is shaken. My daughter's governess found the body, damn near fainted. My cook refuses to enter the gallery, and the vicar is muttering about the family curse." "Uh-huh," said Wimsey, his eyes twinkling. "The Gothic element arrives. I take it the family curse isn't congenital imbecility?" Sir Peveril looked pained. Old superstition. Something about the gallery being haunted. Centuries ago, one of the Arkwrights was supposed to have painted his mistress there, then shot her, or vice versa. The details vary depending on whether you ask the vicar or the village postmistress. I see, said Whimsy, taking a thoughtful turn about the room. So we have a smiling footman, a missing salver, a haunted gallery, and a governess rendered nearly poetic by shock. Bunter, do take a photograph of the Rose Gallery before the daylight fails. And if you could also inquire whether the footman had any recent dental work, I should be grateful. Dental work, my lord. Yes, said Whimsy airily. To maintain a smile after death requires either a certain muscular retention or, well, I shall leave that to the medical men. For now, I should like to see the gallery myself. Alone, if you please. It's always best to introduce oneself to a murder scene without a crowd. One can hear what the room is trying not to say. He turned, almost lightly, and vanished up the staircase, whistling a passage from the Mikado that dealt with execution. Below, Sir Peveril muttered, "That man is either a lunatic or a genius." "Sometimes," said Bunter blandly, "it is difficult to tell the difference, sir." Bunter found Lord Peter some 10 minutes later, standing motionless in the center of the Rose Gallery, gazing with mild disfavor at a series of ancestral portraits. The body had already been removed, leaving behind only a faint impression on the Turkish carpet and an intrusive scent of overripe peonies mingled with the forensic starch of Inspector Heaviside's gloves. "Very little blood," Whimsy murmured, more to the room than to Bunter. "But a striking absence of disorder, wouldn't you say?" He fell or was placed face first into the flowers, like a man reverencing his sins. But look here. Not a single bloom out of place around the rim. And what a curious arrangement of furniture. Chairs along the walls as if awaiting an audience. An audience for what? "The footman's name was Marcus Biddle, my lord," Bunter said softly. 23, local born. Came into Sir Peveril's employ a year ago. Bit of a reader, the cook says. Kept to himself but never impolite. Did she volunteer that, or did you extract it with a scalpel and a souffle? She was already in tears when I entered the kitchen, my lord. Merely gave me a list of who came down for hot water last night and told me he used to write poetry in the margins of the larder inventory. Poetry and peonies, Whimsy mused, and apparently no enemies. Never trust a man without enemies, Bunter. It usually means he's lying or dead. Well, let's test the door. He strode across the room to the far end where the tall oak door, more ceremonial than practical, stood partly ajar. Whimsy stooped and examined the lock, whistling faintly. Recently oiled, not dusty, no sign of forced entry. A gallery that's kept locked, yet opens smoothly and smells of lavender polish. And no one admits to giving Biddle the key. No key found on the body either, Bunter added. Indeed. Whimsy stood and brushed off his knees. And yet here he was, posthumously installed among the ancestors. It doesn't strike you as awfully self-conscious, Bunter. Rather too theatrical. The smiling corpse, the vanished salver, the haunted gallery. One half expects a clap of thunder and a ghostly violin. If I may say so, my lord, one does not usually fetch silverware to one's suicide. Quite. Now, let us interview the cook. A woman in tears is like a stage direction in a Bernard Shaw play, blunt but rarely spontaneous. In the kitchen, which smelled reassuringly of pastry and pipe smoke, Mrs. Humbert was in full lamentation, seated at the scrubbed table, dabbing her eyes with a voluminous handkerchief whose floral print seemed poorly chosen for a discussion of death. "I always said he was a good boy," she sobbed. "Quiet, neat in his ways, never once forgot to bring down the scullery pans, even when he had that chill last December. And he never looked at me sideways, not once." "I'm relieved to hear it," said Whimsy gravely. "The prevalence of sideways looks among young footmen has long troubled our better households. Tell me, did Marcus ever mention anything unusual happening in the gallery? Cold spots, mysterious music, a sense of unseen presences?" She looked, startled, then crossed herself. "Lord, sir, you don't think it was them?" "I think," Whimsy said gently, "that someone very human wanted Marcus Biddle dead and took great pains to make it look, perhaps, like the workings of something inhuman. Did he ever say anything about the family? Complaints? Resentments?" Mrs. Humbert sniffed, only that he didn't trust Miss Lavinia's friend, Mr. March. Bit of a dandy, if you'll pardon me, and always turning up round back after supper like he didn't want to be seen by Sir Peveril. "Mr. March? An artist, so I hear. Been doing studies of the gallery. Miss Lavinia lets him in by the side door. Not quite proper, if you ask me." Whimsy did not respond at once. He studied the cook with mild interest, then asked, "Did Biddle ever mention the missing salver?" "No, sir," she said, blinking. "What, the one gone missing this morning? I only noticed when I was laying out for luncheon. Funny that. We'd only used it yesterday to bring in Sir Peveril's port." "Did Biddle serve last night?" "No, sir. Jennings had trade duty. Marcus was on wine." "Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Humbert. One final thing. Did Marcus ever visit the gallery unbidden?" "Oh, no, sir," she said, quite scandalized. "Sir Peveril doesn't allow the staff in there without permission. Something about oils and heat from the stove. Bad for the canvases." Whimsy inclined his head. "And yet Marcus ended there. It's as if he was drawn." They next found Jennings, the second footman, polishing spoons in the scullery with grim determination. He was a pallid youth with ears like folded handkerchiefs and an expression of permanent apology. I didn't see anything, my lord," he said at once. "I just brought in the tray last night, like always. That was 9:30. Sir Peveril was alone in the library. I left the port decanter on the table." "And Marcus?" "He was still downstairs. I remember because he was reading that same daft book he always had. The Mysteries of Udolpho, or something like. Said it helped him sleep." "An interesting choice for a footman," Whimsy remarked. "Any quarrels between you?" "Oh, no, sir. He was kind, bit dreamy, would forget he was meant to fetch something and just stand staring at the ceiling. Not lazy, just strange." "And the gallery?" Whimsy asked. "Did he ever speak of it?" Jennings hesitated. "He used to say the eyes in the paintings followed you. Joking like. But sometimes I'd find him looking in, through the crack in the door." "Did he say why?" "No, sir. Just that he thought it was a pity such beauty was shut up all the time." Whimsy raised an eyebrow. "Beauty? Did he mean the art?" Jennings reddened. "Or someone in it, maybe. There's a painting in there. Lady Aurelia. Died young, they say. Looks just like Miss Lavinia. Some say it is Miss Lavinia. Only Marcus used to talk about her like she were alive." "Indeed," said Whimsy softly. "A ghost that smiles through oil and canvas, and a young man who smiles in death. Thank you, Jennings." Bunter met him in the hall with a note. "From Inspector Heaviside, my lord, the local physician's report." Whimsy opened it. His brows lifted. "No sign of poisoning or external injury. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. But the lips, stiffened in a way inconsistent with natural expression, suggests a forced grimace, post-mortem." "Like a mask," said Bunter. "Precisely." Whimsy's eyes glittered. "And what is a mask for, if not to deceive or distract?" He turned and began climbing the stairs again. "We shall have a word with Miss Lavinia next. I fancy she knows rather more than she ought, and perhaps less than she fears." Behind him, the grandfather clock ticked with unnatural solemnity, and a distant door creaked shut, as though sealing a chapter not yet written. Lord Peter found Miss Lavinia Arkwright in the south-facing drawing-room, seated at a Queen Anne escritoire with a sheaf of sketchbooks open before her and an expression composed with the precision of someone determined not to cry. The room was lined with porcelain dogs, spindly-legged chairs, and damask curtains so faded they looked powdered with age. The effect was charming, if melancholy, like a debutante who'd lived too long. She looked up as Whimsy entered, her grey-blue eyes cool but not unfriendly. "I assume you are Lord Peter," she said. "You do not look like the police, nor like my father's solicitor." "How fortunate," said Whimsy lightly, removing his gloves. "Neither profession would permit me the liberty of admiring your drawing of Lady Aurelia. May I?" Lavinia flushed. She made no move to conceal the sketch before her, a deft graphite rendering of a woman with a high forehead, tilted eyes, and a mouth caught between smile and silence. "She fascinates me," Lavinia said. "No one seems to know who painted her, or even if the likeness is accurate. I've stared at her since I was a child." "Your cook informs me the resemblance is remarkable," said Whimsy, seating himself with boneless elegance on a spindly chair. "You and the ghost of the gallery. How very Byronical." Lavinia gave a small smile, more wary than amused. "Marcus Biddle said something like that. Once." "Did he now? How interesting. Tell me, Miss Arkwright, did you and Mr. Biddle speak often?" She hesitated, a flicker of discomfort behind her composure. "Not often. But he was polite, intelligent, not like Jennings, who jumps if you address him with a full sentence. Marcus read good poetry, and not just Kipling. Once he quoted Christina Rossetti to me, 'When I am dead, my dearest, sing no sad songs for me.' Rather odd, now I think of it." Whimsy regarded her with interest. "Did you find it odd at the time?" "I thought it melancholy, but sweet. Marcus seemed rather full of melancholy in general. He once told me the paintings in the gallery made him feel both comforted and crushed. I didn't ask him to explain. And yet he lingered there, even secretly, I gather." "Yes," she admitted, folding her arms. "I saw him once, through the far door. I hadn't gone in. He was just standing there, absolutely still, staring at Aurelia. He didn't hear me, or if he did, he didn't turn." Whimsy made a thoughtful hum. "Were you ever concerned by this attachment? Did it strike you as inappropriate?" "I wasn't afraid of him," Lavinia said firmly. "He was strange, yes. Gentle. Too gentle, perhaps. But not dangerous." "Did he ever mention Mr. March to you?" Her gaze sharpened. "Why should he have?" "Humor me," Whimsy said, steepling his fingers. Lavinia hesitated, then glanced at the sketch pad again. "Marcus disliked him. I don't know why. They barely spoke. I believe Marcus thought Edmund was, well, an interloper, that he didn't belong in the house. Whereas Marcus believed he did. I don't know, perhaps. Marcus seemed to belong wherever he stood. He had that stillness, the kind people mistake for authority. I sometimes think it was only that he didn't know where else to be." "You're rather sympathetic to him, Miss Arkwright." "Wouldn't you be?" Her tone sharpened. He was poor, clever, and out of place. He was also dead by morning. Whatever sympathy I feel seems mild in comparison." "Quite," said Whimsy. "And Mr. March? What of him? Where is he now?" She drew herself up. "Gone. He left 2 days ago, back to London. He said he'd return in a week." Whimsy stood. "Do you suppose he will?" Lavinia met his gaze squarely. "That depends, doesn't it, on what he's running from, or toward." As Whimsy returned to the main corridor, he was joined by Bunter, who handed him a small object wrapped in linen. "Found this beneath the window seat in the gallery, my lord. Tucked rather too carefully to be accidental." Whimsy unwrapped it with the delicacy of a man unveiling a rare manuscript. Inside lay a handkerchief, cheap linen, finely embroidered with the initial M. Along one edge was a faint brownish stain, no longer vivid, but unmistakably blood. "Marcus," said Whimsy, weighing the cloth in his palm. "Or March. Perhaps both. The plot thickens, Bunter, and not like a well-reduced sauce. What's the vicar's opinion of ghosts, did you discover?" "He believes in them, my lord, but only after sherry." "Then let us pay him a visit before he sobers. and take the long route through the churchyard. One always hears better from the dead when the soil is uneven. They found the Reverend Charnock sorting hymnals in a draughty vestry that smelled of beeswax and long, dull sermons. A small man with a wistful beard and a stoop more philosophical than physical, he received them with mild surprise. "I confess I hoped you'd come," he said, motioning them to sit. "Not because I enjoy scandal, Lord Peter, but because the air in this village has turned restless. Like the gallery itself, always silent, always watched." "Sir Peveril mentioned something about a family curse," Whimsy said, accepting tea with something approaching reverence. Or perhaps it was merely local gossip dressed in Victorian velvet. "The Arkwrights," Charnock said, "have never been ordinary. They do not go mad, but they brood. The story goes that Lady Aurelia, whose portrait I dare say you've seen, was shot in that very gallery by a jealous suitor, or by her husband, or perhaps she shot herself. There are versions." "A flexible narrative," murmured Whimsy. Charnock smiled faintly. "Legend is truth permitted to be interesting. The villagers believe her ghost lingers, sometimes friendly, sometimes not. There were children once who refused to pass the gallery at night. Said they saw her move." "And did Marcus Biddle see her?" The vicar's hands stilled on the hymnal. "He asked about her. More than once. Wanted to know if it was possible to fall in love with someone long dead. I told him it was an occupational hazard of poets. He said he understood her loneliness." Whimsy was silent for a moment, then, "Did you ever speak with Mr. March?" "Once. I didn't like him. Too charming, too fluent, and entirely uninterested in the house's history. He wanted to capture likenesses, not stories." "Likenesses," said Whimsy softly. "And yet he left before completing the series. How strange." Charnock looked up. "Is it strange, or simply guilty?" When they left the vestry, the sky was bruising toward late afternoon. Whimsy paused in the churchyard, eyes on the sun-slanted stones. "Bunter, how many people does it take to stage a haunting convincingly?" "I believe it depends on the audience, my lord." "Indeed. And this audience includes a young woman haunted by her own face, a footman enamored of a ghost, and a painter too skilled to be careless." He turned. "Let's speak with Jennings again. I fancy he knows what Marcus was carrying the night he died. And after that—" "Yes, my lord. We'll find the silver salver. I rather think it didn't vanish. It was given." Bunter raised a brow. "And what would one give it for, my lord?" "A gift," Whimsy murmured, "or a bribe, or an offering, to something one loved, feared, or wished to silence." He said nothing further until they reached the house. Behind them, the wind caught in the trees with a sigh, like distant weeping. The footman, Jennings, received them in the entrance hall with the same blank, bovine civility as before, but Whimsy, sharp-eyed as a hawk spotting a tremor in grass, noticed a faint shadow under the boy's right eye. Not a bruise, no, nothing so vulgar, but the kind of sallow hollowness that comes from too many sleepless nights and a conscience that has begun to make itself heard. Whimsy did not immediately question him. Instead, he wandered toward the library, waving a hand with exaggerated carelessness. "Ah, Mr. Jennings, just the fellow. I find myself tragically bereft of insight into your nightly duties. Would you indulge me?" Jennings hesitated only a second. "Certainly, my lord." "Capital. Now then, on the evening in question, Sunday last, you were on duty, were you not?" "Yes, my lord." "From what hour?" 4 o'clock until midnight, sir. Then George from the kitchen took over." "And what did that involve, precisely?" Jennings straightened a little. "Drawing curtains, attending the master if he rang, stoking fires, locking the side doors, and tidying the silver. There was a dinner party earlier that week." "Ah, yes," Whimsy murmured. "The infamous salver, which has now disappeared." The footman's eyes shifted, a flicker so brief it might have gone unnoticed by anyone less trained in the small theatre of guilt. "I wouldn't say disappeared, my lord," Jennings offered carefully. It might have been misplaced. The butler's been looking. Misplaced by whom, I wonder? Wimsey wandered closer, examining the shelves with feigned interest. A heavy object, isn't it? Silver, early Victorian, somewhere along the rim. The sort of thing that might leave a mark if dropped. Or used. Jennings blinked. Used, my lord. To serve cucumber sandwiches, Wimsey said breezily. Or perhaps, though I tremble at the vulgarity, to knock a man very neatly unconscious. Jennings' hands twitched at his sides, but he said nothing. Wimsey turned, all lightness gone from his manner. Jennings, it is no use pretending. Someone gave or took that salver from the butler's pantry during your watch. If it was used to harm Marcus Biddle, intentionally or not, it would be very much in your interest to speak now, before it becomes obstruction of justice. The young man swallowed, pale now. I didn't see him hurt, my lord. I swear it. But you saw something. Jennings's hands clenched. I saw Mr. March. That is, I heard him, around 10:30. I'd just locked the side door near the breakfast room when I heard footsteps in the long gallery. I thought it odd. The family were abed and visitors gone. So I peeked in through the north door, just a crack. Yes. Mr. March was standing by Lady Aurelia, holding something. Cloth-wrapped, like silver. He set it on the pedestal beneath the painting. Then he just stood, watching it. Wimsey's brows lifted. The salver? I thought so, my lord. But I was afraid. He looked strange. His face? It was like he was talking to someone, but no one else was there. I backed away. And said nothing. Jennings' voice dropped. I thought perhaps he'd gone queer in the head. He was always peculiar about that painting. Kept saying the light was wrong, that he couldn't catch her eyes, that they kept changing. And you didn't follow him? No, my lord. But later, maybe an hour, Sir Peveril rang. Said he'd heard something in the gallery. Asked me to look. I went, and the room was empty. The pedestal was bare. And Marcus? Not there, but the window latch was undone. I thought maybe it had rattled. Wimsey considered this silently, then said, When did you next see Mr. March? Jennings hesitated. Not until breakfast the next morning. He looked pale, said he hadn't slept well. I imagine not, murmured Wimsey. Bunter, who had stood silent as an oak coat stand until now, stepped forward and said quietly, There's a mark, my lord, on the stone beneath Lady Aurelia's painting. A scuff, just so. Something heavy was placed there and removed. Wimsey nodded. Thank you, Bunter. Mr. Jennings, you've been helpful. One last question. Did Mr. March ever paint Miss Lavinia? Jennings looked startled. Not properly, no. He started a sketch once, but she asked him to stop. Why? I don't know, my lord. She said it made her look too much like someone else. As they stepped back into the hall, Wimsey lit a cigarette with the idle air of a man with nowhere urgent to be. Too much like someone else, Bunter. One begins to wonder how many people Miss Arkwright is supposed to resemble. The painting, my lord? Yes, Aurelia and Lavinia. Two names divided by centuries and some elaborate eyebrow work, but unnervingly alike. And Mr. March, who flees before his work is finished, and a footman who hears voices in empty rooms. What a charmingly domestic nest of phantoms. What next, my lord? We find Miss Arkwright again, and then we look at what Mr. March left behind. They found Lavinia in the studio, a modest room above the conservatory, still filled with the ghost of turpentine and fading afternoon light. Half-finished portraits leaned against the walls. Wimsey bent before one, a canvas showing the family dining room, complete down to the threadbare rug and the cluster of moths near the gaslight. The level of detail was extraordinary. Miss Arkwright, he said softly, would you mind terribly if I inspected Mr. March's things? She stood by the window, back stiff, as if steeling herself. "They're in the cabinet. He left most of his sketches. Said they were too personal to sell." Whimsy nodded his thanks and crossed to the cabinet, a narrow walnut affair with brass handles. Inside were sheaves of paper, charcoals, 3 brushes, and a flask of turpentine. He began leafing through the sketches, crisp lines, expert shading, a sure hand. Several of the Arkwright portraits, a few of Jennings, and then one that made him pause. It was Lavinia, unmistakably. But her expression was wrong. Not merely serious, but haunted. The eyes were deeper, the mouth thinner, and the hair more tightly coiled, older-fashioned. There was something not quite of this century in her face. Whimsy held it out. "Miss Arkwright, did he show you this?" She turned and gasped, stepping back. No, he said he destroyed that one." It appears he reconsidered, or lied. "Who is it, Miss Arkwright?" Her voice was barely audible. "I don't know, but it's not me." Whimsy looked back at the sketch. "But it is, Miss Arkwright. Or rather, it is someone he saw in you. This is how he imagined Lady Aurelia. He was trying to paint her through you. Do you understand?" She sat down heavily on the studio bench. "He used to say I moved like her, that in certain lights he could almost see her again. I thought he was being poetic." "Perhaps he was," said Whimsy. "But obsession has teeth. Tell me, did you ever see him and Marcus together?" She blinked. "Not often, but once. I heard them, in the library, arguing. Marcus was saying something about lies and about how Edmund didn't understand what she meant. I don't know what he meant." Whimsy did. Back in his room, with the sketch carefully packed, Whimsy sat at the writing desk and began to draft a telegram. "To Inspector Merrick, Scotland Yard Urgent. Request background on Edmund March. Real name associates, prior commissions. Note possible link to psych patient missing from Brookhaven. Asylum, 1920s. Pattern of female portraits. Doppelganger elements. Query any connection to Aurelia Arkwright family records. Send post haste. Whimsy." He folded the paper with precision, then leaned back in his chair, letting the wind from the open window disturb the edge of the curtains. Somewhere in this house, obsession had curdled into something dangerous. The past, whether imagined or inherited, had found its way into the bloodstream of the present. And Marcus Biddle, gentle and strange, had died not because he saw a ghost, but because someone else believed too deeply that one had returned. The telegram had scarcely departed via the underfooted village boy than the house seemed to close around Whimsy again, like ivy clasping a ruin, too picturesque to be wholesome. With the sketch of Lavinia that was not Lavinia folded in tissue and Jennings's trembling story fermenting in his brain, Whimsy turned his attention to the curious geographical detail that had been niggling at him since his arrival, the curious location of the library window. He descended the east corridor with Bunter in tow, pausing at every door, noting which yielded easily and which resisted. "Curious thing about houses like this, Bunter," he remarked lightly. "They age like aristocrats, gracefully up front, but with dry rot in the rear." "Indeed, my lord," Bunter agreed, glancing toward the half-ajar drawing-room door, behind which someone was tuning a piano with great discontent. They reached the library. Whimsy entered without announcement. The room was in mild disarray. An overturned footstool, a chessboard with the black bishop missing, and a faint trace of camphor on the air, but it was the window that held his attention, tall, narrow, and latched in a peculiarly old-fashioned way, brass hooks that locked from above rather than below. "Bunter," he murmured, indicating the sill. "What do you make of that?" Bunter, crouching, ran a gloved finger along the inside edge. "Some disturbance, my lord. Dust shifted. Someone either opened it recently, or made it appear so. Delightfully ambiguous. And the ground beneath? You examined it yesterday. Yes, my lord. Damp soil beneath the box hedge. One partial footprint. Size 11 boot, likely a man. Tread too clean for a gardener. Ah. Wimsey stood, examining the pattern of the floorboards between the window and the hearth. One might surmise, then, that our ghost, having exited through this window, was possessed of remarkably good sense to leave such a faint impression. If he exited, said Bunter. Wimsey's face lit up like a cat approaching a canary. Just so. But consider this, Bunter. What if the window was opened not for escape, but to suggest it? Bunter tilted his head slightly. To stage an intrusion? Exactly. A clever touch, especially if one wished to give the impression of outside danger. A ghost, perhaps, or an intruder. A red herring to tickle the local nerves. A quiet knock interrupted them, and Lady Arkwright entered, a vision of iron-spined grace in widow's grey. She held a small bundle wrapped in muslin. I'm told, she said, that you have been troubling my footman. Wimsey bowed. Troubling him, Lady Arkwright? No, merely engaging in a little forensic conversation, though he does appear a tad oversensitive for a household of this caliber. She stepped forward, placing the bundle delicately on the table. I prefer my servants discreet, not sentimental. This was found in Mr. March's room. Wimsey unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a book, thin, bound in faded green linen. Memoirs of the late Aurelia Arkwright, privately printed, the sort of thing once dashed off by amateur historians with more ink than sense. He opened it. Ah, yes. Lady Aurelia, born 1771, drowned or vanished 1794. And here, it seems, is her portrait. Good God. The illustration, an engraving based on a lost miniature, might have been Lavinia's slightly older twin. The same heavy eyes, the same melancholy mouth. Lady Arkwright was watching him. You begin to understand, Lord Peter. Edmund was obsessed. From the moment he arrived, he was insistent upon seeing her rooms, the family records, that painting. I thought it academic. Then Lavinia said he watched her too closely. Why allow him to remain, then? She drew herself up. Because he was a genius, and because he was dying. Wimsey looked sharply at her. Lung condition, she said. Not infectious, but terminal. He knew. He asked to spend his last months here. Said he needed to finish the portrait before he couldn't hold a brush. I didn't think. Her fingers trembled only slightly. I didn't think he would harm anyone. Neither do I, yet, said Wimsey gently. But obsessions are strange tenants. They pay in inspiration, but often default insanity. She gave a tight smile. You sound like my late husband. He used to say the Arkwright line was full of romantic madness. But we always paid our debts. As she departed, Wimsey turned back to the book. Bunter leaned over his shoulder. There's a note, my lord, opposite the plate. Indeed. In a narrow, angular hand, her eyes would not stay still. They shifted even on the page. No painter can bind a ghost. Rather poetic for a lunatic, Wimsey muttered. But here's a question. If March was so fixated on the dead, why did he quarrel with the living? He tossed the book onto the table and turned toward the hall. To the vicarage, Bunter. I believe the reverend gentleman buried something more than a body this week. The Reverend Dr. Southcote was an elderly man of pinched countenance and ecclesiastical stoicism, who regarded Wimsey's arrival with the pained resignation of one accustomed to parishioners confessing things they oughtn't. I trust, he said dryly, this is not a call to prayer. Hardly, Wimsey said, merely a brief inquisition about the dearly departed Marcus. Southcote gestured them into his study. I conducted the burial. No need to trouble the coroner, they said, given his medical history. Yes, curious that, said Wimsey, settling into a stiff Victorian chair, his medical history being chiefly nervous collapse and poetic nonsense. Marcus was a gentle soul, said the vicar stiffly. He saw things others didn't. Not untrue things, merely unprovable. Ghosts? Southcote gave him a long look. You would mock what you do not believe. Wimsey leaned forward. And did he see something? The night he died? I believe, said the vicar slowly. He believed he did. He spoke to me that morning. Said the house was unquiet, that the dead were returning. I thought it metaphor, a poet's hysteria, not a warning. I didn't know to treat it as one. And Edmund March? The vicar was silent for a beat too long. He came to me a week before the death. Confessed, not a sin precisely, but a conviction, that Aurelia had returned, not in spirit but in flesh, that she had been reborn. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. As Lavinia? Not by name, but by implication, yes. Did Marcus know this? Southcote's mouth tightened. He suspected. They argued. Marcus said it was sacrilege, that love should not be reanimated like a corpse. And what did March say? That he would bring her back, even if it killed him. Wimsey stood. I rather think it did. Outside, the light was fading, long shadows cast over the graveyard stones like draped veils. Bunter glanced toward a crooked stone with half-vanished script. He meant to resurrect her, my lord. Not literally, but art is a kind of necromancy. And March may have believed that in painting Lavinia as Aurelia, he was reviving something long dead. The trouble is, so did Marcus. He looked up at the cold, distant windows of the manor house. One of them believed too much, the other, perhaps not enough. A stiff breeze had begun to worry the hedgerows by the time Wimsey and Bunter returned to Arkwright House, the sky chafing with low clouds and the air edged with the peculiar restlessness of an English dusk. Not quite rain, not quite dusk, but something unnamed and historic in its gloom. The great house stood in studied indifference, windows reflecting the chill, its chimneys curled with whispers of smoke like breath withheld. Inside, Lavinia was at the pianoforte, playing something dark and chromatic that resisted harmony. Wimsey paused in the doorway, listening. Her back was straight, her wrists delicate and precise, the notes falling like water in a crypt. Chopin? He asked softly. She did not turn. Scriabin, the prelude in E minor. How very appropriate. At that, she turned, a small flicker in her eyes. You mean morbid. Not at all, said Wimsey, moving to stand behind her. Though some would say Scriabin is music for those who believe ghosts have excellent pitch. She smiled faintly. It keeps the house from speaking. Does it? He said lightly. And what would the house say if it did speak? That I look too much like a portrait and not enough like a person, she said with sudden sharpness, and rose from the bench. Wimsey studied her. Have you ever seen the miniature, the one of Aurelia? No, Lady Arkwright won't allow it in the open. She says the likeness is unsettling. Understandable. Marcus Southcote might have agreed with her. He thought March's obsession had crossed the line into something dangerously sacramental. She folded her arms. Marcus was afraid of intensity. He lived at the edges of things, always peering in. Edmund was bolder. Wimsey picked up a loose sheet of music from the stand, noting the scrawled notations in a foreign hand. Did March ever ask you to pose as Aurelia? No, he never needed to. She paused, then added, He said I was her, that I carried her eyes, her voice, her sorrow. And did you believe him? She looked away. I wanted to. Isn't that what every woman wants? To be the only thing a man sees? There was silence for a moment. The fire crackled once. Miss Lavinia, Wimsey said quietly. Did you kill him? She turned back, her face unreadable. No, but I might have, if he'd asked. That gave him pause. She swept past him, then, leaving the room perfumed with music and some older, nameless unease. Bunter emerged from the corridor beyond, bearing a slim envelope. "From the local postmaster, my lord. A copy of the wire sent to Mr. March from London 2 days before his death." Rather urgent in tone. Whimsy slit it open. The contents were brief. "March, stop. Do not proceed. Her identity confirmed false. Stop. Woman you paint is not Lavinia Northcote. Stop. Await confirmation. Stop." "Ah." Whimsy stared at it a moment. "Well," he said, "that's a nasty little wasp in the jam. Someone in London seems to have thought our Miss Lavinia isn't quite what she claims." Bunter frowned. "March received this when?" 2 days before he died. Meaning, he had 48 hours to wonder whether the ghost he believed in was wearing a borrowed face. But why would anyone impersonate Lavinia Northcote, my lord? And to what end? "That," said Whimsy, tapping the telegram against his hand, "is precisely what I proposed to ask her." But she was gone. No one had seen her leave the room. The side door into the rose corridor stood ajar, its hinges murmuring faintly in the draught. Bunter moved to close it. "No," said Whimsy. "Let her go. If she's false, she'll run. If she's real, she'll weep. Either way, we'll know more tomorrow." That night, the house did not sleep. A storm gathered. At 2 a.m, a footman, Jennings again, pale as milk, reported a light in the ruined chapel across the east meadow. Whimsy rose at once, donning his rain cape and retrieving a small electric torch from his bag. "I fancy we'll find more than spiders, Bunter." They crossed the sodden grass in silence, the wind slapping at their sleeves. The chapel was a stone shell, half swallowed by ivy and thyme, but light flickered within. As they approached, a figure darted out, barefoot, hair flying, skirts soaked. "Miss Lavinia!" Whimsy called. But she did not stop. She vanished into the trees beyond, swallowed whole. Inside the chapel, the air smelled of mildew and old prayers. There were candles, a small folding easel, and a canvas, still wet. Whimsy held the torch over it. Bunter drew a sharp breath. It was Aurelia, or Lavinia, but younger. Her eyes closed, her head tilted as if listening to something neither inside nor outside the frame. The painting was unsigned. A single sheet of notepaper lay beside it. "Forgive me. I believed in her too much. E." Whimsy stared at it, then turned to Bunter. "Get Lady Arkwright and the house solicitor." Within the hour, they were gathered. Lady Arkwright in a thick robe, her grey hair unpinned, and Mr. Collier, the solicitor, muttering about wills and rain. "This," said Whimsy, indicating the canvas, "is the final work of Edmund March. Possibly his confession, possibly his apotheosis. Either way, it is not the work of a man afraid." Lady Arkwright studied the portrait. "It's her." "Which her?" Whimsy asked. "That, my lady, is the essential question." Collier stepped forward. "My lord, if I may, there is something odd. The will Mr. March filed named Lavinia Northcote as sole beneficiary." "Yes, and—" "Well, the birth record for Lavinia Northcote was requested by a party in London last week, but the Northcote family emigrated to Canada after the war, and their daughter, Lavinia, died in 1923, in a fire." There was a long pause. Lady Arkwright's hand gripped the pew rail. "Then who—" Whimsy held up the telegram. "Someone knew, someone told March, and what he painted here in this chapel was not Lavinia. It was a memory, a dream, a ghost, but not the woman staying in your house." "Then who is she?" Whimsy turned slowly. "That, Lady Arkwright, is what we shall uncover. But first, I think you'd better lock the chapel door. We may need it again before this is over." Lady Arkwright did not speak as she turned from the chapel, her steps slow and deliberate over the grass that squelched beneath the weight of ancestral indignation. The storm had blown past in the night, leaving the morning in a state of breathless disarray. Leaves plastered to window panes, shutters creaking, and the scent of earth washed clean but hiding rot beneath. Bunter had gone ahead to ensure hot tea and a fire in the morning room. Whimsy lingered a moment longer by the chapel door, gazing at the locked latch, now sealed by the household's oldest iron key. He had seen confessions before, signed, unsigned, painted, written, whispered, and scrawled in lipstick on a mirror. But this, he mused, was a confession more to oneself than to the world, and that made it all the more dangerous. A man might die for shame, but art, once exposed, cannot hide. Inside the house, Jennings was waiting in the corridor, looking less ghostly, but no more at ease. "My lord," he said cautiously, "Cook says Miss Lavinia's tray was untouched this morning, and no one's seen her since the storm broke last night." Whimsy considered. "Has anyone checked the tower rooms?" "They're locked, my lord. Always have been. Lady Arkwright keeps the keys herself." "And the east wing?" "No sign, sir. We've looked everywhere but the attic stair and the boot cellar." "Then look again," Whimsy said lightly. "But don't shout if you find any skeletons. Just cough discreetly." Jennings hesitated. "There was one thing, sir. Lady Arkwright's lady's maid, Elsa. She said she saw someone in the north corridor just before dawn, wearing a pale dress, moving very slowly." "Ah," said Whimsy. "The White Lady walks at last. Tell Elsa to sketch the hemline next time." He went directly to Lady Arkwright's library, a long room full of books that no one had opened since the Treaty of Versailles, their spines faded and elegant as old sermons. She was seated at her desk, writing a letter in her heavy, decisive hand. "Lady Arkwright," he said gently, "if you have that miniature of Aurelia, I should very much like to see it now." She did not look up. "I've already had it sent down to the morning room." "Excellent. You have a curious efficiency for someone descended from 4 generations of Whigs." She did look up at that. "If this is your version of charm, Lord Peter, I suggest you refine it. I'm not one of your London debutantes." "Mercifully not," said Whimsy. "Most of them cannot distinguish between a Gainsborough and a Hobbema, whereas I suspect you've always known the value of resemblance." She pursed her lips. "I never said Lavinia was Aurelia's twin." "No," he said, "but you let March believe it, or at least never corrected him." She closed the letter with a vicious blot. March was a fool. He wanted a ghost more than a woman. Lavinia gave him both. And what did she want in return? Lady Arkwright's eyes narrowed. "Security, sanctuary, a story to inhabit." "Ah," said Whimsy, "the one thing we all crave, to be made real by someone else's belief." In the morning room, the miniature lay in its velvet case like a relic. Whimsy bent over it, peering through his monocle. Aurelia was indeed beautiful, more so than the portrait in the chapel suggested. Her mouth was thinner, her eyes darker, her expression curious in its ambiguity. She might have been 17 or 70. Time clung to her oddly, like perfume on a paper. "I see what March saw," Whimsy murmured, "but I also see what he missed." At that moment, Bunter entered, holding a small square of muslin between thumb and forefinger. "My lord," he said quietly, "I found this in the laundry chute behind the guest corridor. It's been torn. Smells faintly of turpentine and lavender water." Whimsy took it. A painter's rag? Possibly. But it was folded inside a slipper, a woman's slipper, size 4. And where was the mate? Gone, or hidden. But it suggests Miss Lavinia may have been in the studio last night. Whimsy pocketed the cloth. Or someone wanted us to think she was. He turned to Lady Arkwright. "Might I see the attics, my lady? If Miss Lavinia is neither Lavinia nor missing, she may be waiting for a scene change." She bristled. "There's nothing in the attics but dust and trunks." "All the best secrets live in trunks," he said, "especially those with mothballs." They ascended together, Bunter just behind, every stair groaning its protest. The attic door stuck before opening with a theatrical moan. Inside, the light filtered through warped glass and dust motes thick as gauze. The trunks were indeed there, half a dozen, some sealed with wax, others roped shut. Whimsy knelt beside one marked with the initials R.N., Rebecca Northcote. "This," he said, "is where we stop playing at ghosts." He opened the trunk. It held clothing, older, styles, pre-war, high-necked and serviceable. Beneath the layers was a packet of letters, postmarked from Toronto. One, addressed to Lavinia Northcote, was dated 1924, after her supposed death. Whimsy whistled. So, not so dead, our Lavinia. Lady Arkwright's face was set. "Are you saying she never died?" "I'm saying," Whimsy replied, rising slowly, "that someone pretended she had. Possibly to escape something, possibly to become someone else, and possibly to come here." From the darkest corner of the attic, a creak sounded. Bunter moved first. "My lord." A figure stepped forward, wet hair, torn hem, face pale as candle wax. Miss Lavinia, or the woman who had claimed to be her, looked from one to the other, as if deciding whom she feared less. "Don't send me away," she said very softly. Whimsy tilted his head. "Then you are not Lavinia Northcote?" "No," she whispered. "My name is Cecily March." Bunter inhaled sharply. Whimsy smiled without humor. "Well, that does put the cat amongst the marriage certificates." She stepped closer, her shoulders trembling. "He found me in France. I was modeling for a school in Paris. He thought I looked like the miniature, like her. He called me a living resurrection. I didn't believe him. Not at first. But you played along." "Yes. I needed the money. He needed the vision. It was a bargain." "And then?" "He started to believe I was her, not just look like her, be her. He said I spoke in her voice when I was dreaming. He started painting with his eyes closed." "And then," Whimsy murmured, "someone sent him a telegram, told him who you really were." She nodded. "He confronted me. I said I'd leave. I packed, but he followed me into the studio, and then he changed his mind. He said he forgave me. He begged me to stay, that he would start over, paint me as myself. But when I woke in the morning, he was dead. Poisoned," Whimsy said. "I didn't do it." "No," he agreed. "I don't think you did. But someone did, and whoever it was, believed he'd betrayed a dream." She stared at him, horror dawning. Lady Arkwright turned away, her face unreadable. Whimsy sighed. "Come down, Miss March. Or shall I say, Mrs. March?" "Yes," she whispered. "We married, secretly, 3 months ago." "Then you are his heir," said Lady Arkwright coldly. Whimsy looked at her. "And possibly his widow, but not, I suspect, his murderer." He turned to Bunter. "We need the telegram sender and a guest list from Paris 3 years ago." "And why Paris, my lord?" "Because someone there saw her first, and someone there sent the telegram, and someone," he added, "is not finished painting illusions." Whimsy's pen scratched lightly across the blotter as he addressed a brief telegram to Chief Inspector Parker, concise, surgical, and mildly exasperated. He disliked invoking Scotland Yard unless absolutely necessary, but the affair was veering into territory that reeked not only of murder, but of theatrical manipulation, always a dangerous blend. He handed the missive to Bunter with a nod, and returned to the fire, watching Cecily March as she warmed her hands on the porcelain cup Lady Arkwright had grudgingly allowed her. The girl, no, the woman, was trembling, whether from fear, cold, or accumulated exhaustion was difficult to say. "You understand," Whimsy said conversationally, "that impersonating a dead woman, however artistically inspired, carries certain legal and emotional implications." Cecily looked up, eyes wide and ringed with sleeplessness. He never asked me to be her at first, only to sit for him. But then he began calling me Rilla, at first in jest, then in dreams. He said it was inspiration, that it made the painting real. Painters are allowed their delusions, said Whimsy. What troubles me is that someone else may have shared them and chosen to end the deception rather more terminally. He was going to tell them all, she whispered. He said he would speak to Lady Arkwright the next day. About me, about the marriage. I think he was afraid of her. She hated weakness. Oh, I don't doubt it, murmured Whimsy. But hatred doesn't always end in arsenic. That requires method and motive. Lady Arkwright, who had been seated in a rigid chair like a carved Madonna presiding over a trial, now said with surgical clarity, he was mad, and he died mad. That should be the end of it. I rather think not, said Whimsy mildly. People rarely poison themselves with arsenic unless they are extremely literary or extremely misled. And March, despite his aesthetic peculiarities, had a curious sense of order. No, he was disturbed, but not self-destructive. Lady Arkwright's jaw tightened. And what will you suggest next, Lord Peter? That I poisoned him because he married a commoner? That I resented the insult to a memory already laid to rest? I suggest, Whimsy said, folding his long fingers together, that someone knew who Cecily really was, and feared that her presence here, legitimized by marriage, would expose something they very much needed to keep buried. He rose, pacing slowly. Let us examine what we know. March receives a telegram, unsigned, terse. He reacts with agitation. Shortly afterward, he confirms to Cecily that he knows who she is, and claims to forgive her. He offers to paint her anew, but by morning he is dead. Not with a dramatic flourish, not in some burst of passion, but by slow ingestion, arsenic in his water glass. Cecily shuddered. Meanwhile, Whimsy continued, someone had to have known where he kept his paints, his cups, his cleaning water. Someone with access and familiarity, not merely a guest. Bunter, having returned silently, spoke now. The telegram's handwriting, my lord, it was composed at a tobacconist's on the Rue de Rennes. The clerk there recalled a stern English lady in a wine-coloured coat, paid in francs. Wine-coloured, murmured Whimsy, a practical shade for someone used to disguising stains. Lady Arkwright rose sharply. Are you implying? No, no, he said, lifting a hand. But we must entertain every shade of possibility. Let us consider who else might have known of Cecily's existence. Who else visited Paris 3 years ago? I never, she began, then stopped. Ah, said Whimsy softly. You never visited Paris, but someone in this house did. Someone with a rather continental set of habits. Jennings. The butler, summoned discreetly, entered with his usual air of diffident gravitas. Tell me, said Whimsy, you've been with the family how long? 37 years, my lord. And Lady Arkwright's brother, Mr. Julian Northcote, did he visit the continent often before the war? Jennings hesitated. Mr. Julian, sir, was fond of Florence, and Paris, yes. He had a number of acquaintances in the galleries. And did he not meet with an accident some years ago? A hunting fall, sir, left him not quite himself. Not quite himself, repeated Whimsy. Curious phrase. Does one's morality suffer with a broken spine? Jennings flinched slightly. He became withdrawn, sir, harsh. Did he know Aurelia? Oh, yes, sir. They were cousins. He adored her. Indeed, said Whimsy. Adoration, when left unfulfilled, often curdles into possessiveness. He turned to Cecily. Did you ever meet a man at the Academy, Julian? Tall, walked with a cane, English, grey eyes, perhaps called himself something else. Her brow furrowed. There was a man who watched me, at a cafe, never spoke, just sat, sketching. He wore gloves, even in summer. Julian, Lady Arkwright breathed. No. Whimsy nodded slowly. I think our ghost had a living shadow, a man who never let Aurelia die, and when he saw her again, in Cecily, he realized he could recreate what he'd lost, if not in reality, then in art. He hated March, said Lady Arkwright quietly. Blamed him for encouraging her madness, thought he seduced her away from her duty. To a family that used her as a devotional object, said Whimsy sharply. No wonder she fled. There was a silence. Then Bunter, with exquisite timing, stepped forward. A note, my lord. Found in the tower room. Signed J.N. Whimsy opened it carefully. She lives again, but not for him. He stole her once. He will not steal her twice. He handed it to Lady Arkwright. Your brother has a talent for melodrama. Pity he turned it to poison. I'll summon the doctor, she said faintly. He's in no condition for arrest. No, said Whimsy, but he will answer nonetheless. Cecily whispered. He watched us from the tower. He never spoke. I thought it was just grief. It was, said Whimsy, but the kind of grief that curdles into obsession. He did not want you dead. He only wanted March gone. She looked stricken. He killed a man for a ghost. No, said Whimsy. He killed a man because the ghost became real again, and chose to live. He stood, brushing dust from his knees. Come, Bunter, let us not linger among phantoms. The living are quite dreadful enough. Whimsy took the stairs 2 at a time, not with haste, but with the careless momentum of a man who could afford to be theatrical now that the veil had thinned. The tower room had never sat easy with him. It was too removed from the rest of the house, too conveniently forgotten, too conveniently positioned for a watcher. It was not a place for a man seeking silence. It was a nest for a predator waiting to remember. The wind moaned outside the gabled windows, rattling the latch like a petulant child denied entry. The fire in the grate was low but recent. Bunter, trailing behind with professional silence, adjusted the wick on a shaded lamp and revealed a room neither quite lived in nor quite abandoned. A stack of monographs on symbolism in Flemish painting lay on a chair. A silver-topped cane rested precisely across the bed, and on the desk, under the flattened weight of a polished fossil, sat a sheaf of sketches. Of Cecily, or rather Aurelia, reimagined with sharpened features and slightly older eyes. They're quite good, Bunter said softly, examining the topmost drawing. But there's a strain in the expression, as though he couldn't decide if she was muse or martyr. Whimsy said nothing. He was studying the layout of the room, his gaze following the line of sight from the narrow window. It commanded a perfect view of March's studio. You can watch without being seen, he murmured, and the light at this hour silhouettes every occupant, useful for jealousy or for prophecy. Bunter turned. You believe he thought himself avenging Aurelia? No, said Whimsy. He believed himself preserving her. Cecily was the resurrection, but she had to be saved from corruption, by any means necessary. He picked up the fossil, revealing another note beneath it. This one more labored, the handwriting jerky. She began to vanish again. He put his mark on her. I saw it. Her smile changed. It was no longer Rilla's. He had to be stopped. Whimsy held it up. Do you see, Bunter? He wasn't simply mad. He was logical, in his own grotesque way. Yes, my lord, said Bunter. That's what makes him dangerous. They found Julian Northcote in the conservatory as an absurdly fragile place for a man unraveled by grief. He sat beneath a straggling white rose, its petals yellowing in defiance of its species, with a book open and unread on his lap. The cane lay across his knees like a scepter denied. Whimsy approached with exaggerated delicacy. Julian, he said, may I sit? Northcote glanced up. You already know, don't you? I know a great many things, Whimsy replied. What concerns me is whether you know yourself. There was a pause. Then Julian's mouth twisted, not into a smile, but a dry grimace of something ancestral. She was never meant for him. You mean Aurelia? No, Julian said, shaking his head. I mean Cecily. Aurelia's shade, yes, but more than that. She brought her back with breath and skin. And March, he painted her as if she were just color and canvas. He did not see what I saw. And what was that? Whimsy asked quietly. Julian turned his head, his eyes lucid and terrible. She was proof that Aurelia had not left me, that I had not failed her. When she smiled at him, that proof began to crack. Whimsy nodded slowly. And so you intervened. I gave him mercy, said Julian. It was not violent. He did not suffer. Arsenic is almost gentle when prepared properly. He simply faded. There is nothing gentle in theft, said Whimsy, his voice hardening. You stole a man's life and robbed a woman of her freedom. She would never have been free with him. He wanted to devour her. I wanted to protect. You wanted to possess, Whimsy said flatly. Julian's hands trembled. Perhaps. But she was mine before she was anyone's. Whimsy stood. You will tell this to the police, and they will decide whether madness absolves or condemns. Julian made no reply. Back in the drawing room, Lady Arkwright was pouring tea with the resigned precision of a woman who had lived through 4 tragedies and 5 failed governesses. He will not resist, she said without looking up. There is nothing left in him to struggle with. Whimsy accepted the tea with a faint bow. You knew then? I suspected. He changed after the accident. There was a loss of inhibition, a crudeness in affection. He stopped speaking of Aurelia with grief and began speaking of her as if she were property lost in a fire. You let him stay. He was my brother, she said simply, and the family does not cast out its broken. No, said Whimsy, it merely puts them in towers. There was silence between them. At last, Lady Arkwright said, What will become of Cecily? She will inherit nothing, said Whimsy. March died intestate and without official recognition of the marriage. She is neither widow nor kin. But I think the world may owe her more than money. She brought ruin, said the old woman bitterly. She brought truth, said Whimsy. Ruins were already built. She merely lit a match. He finished his tea and stood, smoothing his coat with a practiced hand. The police will arrive shortly. I suggest your staff not tidy the tower room in the meantime. Lady Arkwright's laugh was dry and without amusement. The staff would rather the tower be raised. It has never liked to be cleaned. Outside, the wind had risen, scattering leaves across the drive in eddies like dancers whose rhythm no longer obeyed the house. Cecily stood by the garden gate, her cloak drawn tightly, her hair unbound. She turned at the sound of footsteps. Is it over? She asked. For you, perhaps, said Whimsy. But endings, like paintings, depend on how the light falls. Thank you, she said, the words small but sincere. He gave her a faint smile. If you must thank someone, thank the girl you were 3 years ago. She was brave enough to run, and brave enough to return. She watched him go, the figure of a man too elegant for the landscape, yet entirely at home in its unease. The mist clung low to the grass. Behind her, the tower loomed, silent now, but not empty. Whimsy did not return directly to London. Instead, he lingered in the village 3 days longer than necessary, occupying the ivy-clad rooms of the Rose and Thorn Inn, with the air of a man conducting a leisurely archaeological dig into recent calamity. The locals, now loosened by scandal and the promise of appearing knowledgeable, proved eager contributors to the reconstruction of events. And Whimsy, with his leisurely drawl and habit of distracting listeners with quotations and odd questions about chimney soot, let them weave and contradict until the pattern began to show itself. On the second morning, as the breakfast tray was being cleared, Bunter entered carrying a worn leather case, recently retrieved from the Arkwright estate. It was in the tower room, Concealed beneath the bed's floorboard, my lord. A false plank, not locked. Merely forgotten, or perhaps deliberately hidden. Whimsy gestured to the desk, already cluttered with sketches, a faint trace of arsenic, a receipt from a Birmingham apothecary, and a letter to no one. The case, once opened, yielded letters, many of them. Dozens, folded neatly, some with ribbon, some stained with what might have been ink or grief. A few were addressed in Aurelia's handwriting, but the majority were from Julian, penned in a style that grew more frantic and intimate over time. They spoke of longing, despair, devotion, and an increasing sense of guardianship. "You are not to be seen as mortal," one read. "You were born from the palette of a higher hand, and I, your keeper, must protect the image against desecration." Whimsy murmured, "Not love letters, Bunter, not even obsession. These are hymns. He didn't adore her, he worshipped her, and when the flesh failed to sustain the myth, he found a substitute." "Miss Cecily," Bunter said quietly. "Yes," said Whimsy. "She was a resurrection and a redemption in one. And March, poor devil, he committed the unforgivable sin of painting her as she was. Julian wanted her painted as she had been, an icon, not a woman." He stood, moving toward the window. Outside, a boy was delivering milk, glancing nervously at the indoors if fearing ghosts might pay. Whimsy tapped the glass. "Bunter, tell me, do you recall the footman?" Bunter, whose memory rivaled card catalogues in utility, nodded. "Samuel, my lord. Short, dark hair, a trace of a limp." You remarked that he smiled at the oddest times. "Precisely," said Whimsy. "And did you notice when he stopped smiling?" Bunter frowned. "Now that you mention it, the morning after Mr. March's death." "Indeed. Before then he was grinning like a cat with cream. But he would have known things, heard things. He delivered the tray to the tower room regularly. He might have seen Julian preparing the drink, or noted that no books had been taken down in days. A man can tell a lot from dust." Whimsy began pacing slowly. "He said nothing, but he knew something. And what's more, he looked relieved when the death came. That suggests fear." "You believe he was being watched?" "No," said Whimsy. "I believe he was warned, possibly threatened, or perhaps, most damning of all, persuaded. He might have believed that March's death would restore peace to the house." Bunter hesitated. "Shall I speak with him?" "No need," Whimsy said. "The police have taken his statement, and I rather think the poor fellow will be content to seek employment where towers are scarce and employers less given to necromantic delusions." He fell silent, staring at the landscape outside. The wind had shifted direction, clearing the mists from the Arkwright estate. The house stood stark now, its secrets outed, its symmetry no longer a comfort but a formal lie. Imposing, hollow, and dreadfully calm. That evening, Cecily arrived at the inn unannounced. She wore a dark coat that didn't quite fit and had cut her hair shorter, perhaps to reclaim something lost or to hide what had been borrowed. "I wanted to thank you," she said without preamble. "You did," Whimsy replied, offering her a seat by the fire. "But people do like to repeat themselves in moments of upheaval, so I will accept your gratitude again with the same baffled humility." Cecily smiled faintly. "It's strange. I came here to understand something about Aurelia, to learn why she haunted me, and I've learned instead that it was never her voice echoing. It was his." "Julian," she nodded. "He didn't just see me as her, he made me into her. Little comments, suggestions, telling me what Aurelia would have worn, how she moved, what she liked. And I listened because I wanted to belong. I thought I was choosing a shape for myself, but I was just stepping into her shadow." Whimsy regarded her carefully. "There's no shame in wanting to be seen." "There is if you become invisible in the process," she said softly. "And yet, I don't think I was the first." "No," said Whimsy. You weren't. The letters suggest there may have been another girl once, just after Aurelia's death, a student model. She vanished from the record rather abruptly. Cecily paled. Do you think he— I think, said Whimsy, that Julian was capable of many things, but perhaps not twice. I suspect the first time nearly broke him. He fled into silence and painting, and only re-emerged when he saw you. And by then, the worship had curdled. She stared at the fire, eyes dry. What will they say about me? That you survived, Whimsy said. That you walked into a house built of madness and left it standing, and that, unlike the others, you did not mistake paint for flesh. She stood then, gathering her things. I'm going to Paris. I've a friend in Montparnasse who paints badly but believes in women as people. Whimsy gave a slight bow. May you never be anyone else's canvas again. When she had gone, Bunter entered with a small parcel. One of Julian's last sketches, unsigned, left without comment on the tower desk. Shall I destroy it, my lord? He asked. Whimsy looked at it. A face half-shadowed, the line between Cecily and Aurelia blurred beyond repair. No, he said finally. Keep it. Let it be a reminder. Of what, my lord? That not all prisons have locks, Whimsy murmured. Some are made of devotion, and some of beauty. He turned to the fire, watching the embers fall. Outside, the wind carried away the last of the mist, and with it, perhaps, the echo of a woman long gone and a smile that had never had reason to begin. It was 3 weeks later, in a drawing room hung with tapestries too faded to provoke conversation, that Lord Peter Whimsy delivered the final clinical incision to the affair, a quiet surgical removal of any lingering sentiment that might obscure the facts. The assembled listeners, mostly acquaintances of the late Julian Arkwright or unfortunate hangers-on of the county set, sipped tea with an air of bewildered expectation. Superintendent Rathbone, present at Whimsy's invitation and seated awkwardly in a Chippendale armchair he seemed likely to collapse through, looked more apprehensive than intrigued. You see, Whimsy began, adjusting his cuff with theatrical indifference, there were 2 deaths at Arkwright House, one of the body, one of the image. It is always the second that provokes a murder. He let that rest for a moment, then glanced at Rathbone. I'll be quick, I promise. I know you have a distaste for excessive literary framing. Rathbone grunted something non-committal. To start, Whimsy continued, the murder of Lucienne March was not a crime of passion, nor of money, but of preservation. The preservation of a myth, to be precise. The myth of Aurelia Arkwright, the angelic, untouchable, deathless woman who had, in truth, died some 5 years prior. But that myth still lived in the mind of Julian. He couldn't bear the idea that Aurelia had been human, mortal, subject to decline and contradiction. So he embalmed her not with embalming fluid, but with paint, legend, and control. But what does that have to do with Mr. March's death? Asked Lady Halberton, dabbing her eyes, though no tears were visible. Whimsy turned to her with a sympathetic smile. Everything, dear lady. You see, Julian had started the final portrait of Aurelia, his masterpiece, he called it, using Cecily Vale as the model. She resembled Aurelia in form, yes, but more importantly, she was pliant, hungry to be seen, and he molded her in Aurelia's image, dress, manner, even her speech. It was an act of psychological taxidermy, but March, bless him, refused to participate in the fantasy. He saw Cecily for who she was. When he began to sketch her on his own, independent of Julian's narrative, he violated the sanctity of the illusion, and for Julian, that was sacrilege. There was a collective intake of breath, like a church congregation catching the whiff of heresy. But surely, Rathbone interjected, that's not enough to poison him with aconitine? Whimsy raised a brow. It would be for most of us, but not for Julian. He had rehearsed the justification for years. When Aurelia died, we now know, it was not sudden illness as reported. It was aconitine. The same compound, the same symptoms. He had already committed the crime once, quietly, without fuss. Officialdom was convinced, but it had not ended the matter for him. Her death created a vacuum he tried to fill with illusion. When that illusion cracked, when March threatened to make her human again, through Cecily, Julian acted. "But how can you be certain?" Rathbone asked. "There's no witness, no confession." "No need," Whimsy said, reaching into his coat and drawing forth a letter. This was discovered in Julian's private case, along with the letters to Aurelia. It was addressed to Cecily, never sent. A confession, thinly disguised as a farewell. It reads in part, "He saw the living girl, not the vision. He desecrated the altar. I have silenced the blasphemy, though even now the shadow of her remains unsteady." Cecily falters. "Perhaps I was wrong to remake her, but beauty must be preserved, and decay is an affront I cannot abide." He folded the letter. Charming fellow, tragic in the operatic sense. There was silence. Even the teacups had ceased clinking. "And Cecily?" someone whispered. "Gone to Paris," Whimsy replied lightly. "Painting badly, by her own admission, but breathing freely. One imagines she'll do quite well if she avoids further entanglements with those who fancy themselves godlike with a brush." He stood. "And now, if you'll permit me, I must take my leave. The countryside is delightful, but London has less chance of being haunted." Rathbone stood too, clearly reluctant. "What happens next?" "There's no suspect to charge." Whimsy tilted his head. "The coroner's verdict will likely remain accidental, unless you care to exhume Aurelia. And Julian has done the state a service by removing himself from its jurisdiction. Let the dead bury the dead, Superintendent. What matters is that the living now understand the truth, and may walk differently because of it." He offered a small bow to the room, then made for the door. Before stepping out, he turned, eyes twinkling. "One more thing, do keep an eye on your footman. When one smiles without reason, it's rarely because the soup was excellent." And with that, he disappeared down the hall, leaving behind only the faint scent of sandalwood, a puzzled silence, and the distant echo of Latin verse murmured under his breath.